Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Hi there, if you can see and hear me and the guest for the session today, please put a hi in the chat box. Okay, can we be seen? Yes, no? Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot, Henry, for validating that. And thank you all and welcome to today's Insights with Upgrad session. And with me today, I have a very special guest, Brady, attending the session and conducting this for all of you all the way from the United States. Thanks so much, Brady, for joining us. And thank you to all of you for joining us today as well. And before I move on to introduce the speaker and the topic for the day, I would like to let you know about two very quick things. For any questions you have for Brady to answer at the end of the session, please use the Q&A box. If you have any technical difficulties during the session with respect to audio and video, use the chat box. Okay, that's the two easy rules for the session. And today's session is powered by Upgrad, a higher education online provider and we've been upskilling working professionals across the globe with paid learners from 85 plus countries and having impacted 5 million plus lives so far. So that's about us and about the speaker for the day. Brady, CEO and founder of 32 Edu, is a market research professional who has used his educational background and years of experience to help hundreds of universities, companies, and investors make informed business decisions by simplifying and clarifying complex market data. In today's session of Market Research 101, Brady takes us through the basics and the complexities of market research and market research processes and a lot more with amazing ideas and examples from across the industries. Thanks a lot, Brady, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I love that you use that specific term about simplifying and clarifying. It's really what the role of market research is. I almost think of it in terms of summarization and just trying to get to what is the real takeaway. So I'm happy to be here and talk about this.
Great. I have, just to ease things out for Brady, I have launched a poll with which all of you are requested to type in. Let us know more about your years of experience, the outcome that you're expecting today, and which industry you're from, so that Brady can help personalize the session a lot more for you.
Yeah, we're getting some results coming in now.
Okay, about 50% of you have pressed the keys. Request the remaining 50% to do so.
So we're looking at a good bit of interest around how we do this and kind of what is the methodologies and the purposes around it, and then a little bit more about the career aspect of it too, which is perfect because that was what I was hoping for when I was putting this together. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay.
Sure.
Go.
Yep, can see it.
Everybody see that all right? All right, so today, like we mentioned, we're going to be talking about marketing or market research, marketing research. Sometimes you hear it called that as well. And you know, just a few of the things that few of the styles of market research, you can see they're listed, and targeting specific audiences, survey, but we'll get into the specifics of it. Let me see. There we go. So like we mentioned, the first thing we're going to talk about is what is market research? What's the market research industry? We're going to talk about the purposes of it. Then we're going to talk about the methods utilized, and throughout the presentation and a couple various points, we're going to talk about the career aspects of it and what it's like being a market research professional. So you can get a feel about if this is a good career target for you, if this is something that you want to do going forward. Yeah, so let's get going. What is market research? The act of gathering information about consumers' needs and preferences. Now, this definition is a little bit lacking in my book. It's straight from the dictionary, but in my mind, like I mentioned, that key piece of summarization is the other thing. You hear the phrase 30,000-foot view so many times whenever you're talking with executives or you're talking with decision makers. Is you know what 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 we're really concerned with doing as a market research professional is taking an abundance of data and distilling it down into the clearest, smallest amount of actionable insights possible. So, we know about how much data has been generated in the world in the past few years, just multiplying at an exponential pace. And so, having professionals that are able to go from the complex and bring it down uh, to this really specific insights about what should be done in light of what is something that's really in demand, and what this market research profession is all about. Couple little insights about the market research industry. 2018 or 2008 to 2019, we're looking at 3.9% annual growth. It's about a $74 billion industry. It's a massive industry. That 3.9% annual growth is not really fast. It's kind of indicative of this space that's just kind of a stalwart that's always there and always chugging along. It's never going to see, exponential growth in the size of the space. It's just consistently something that's in demand as an operational function now, something akin to like finance. So just it's getting to be more and more commonplace. We did see a big tick up in 2017, not sure specifically why, but 41 out of the 73 billion comes from revenue derived in the United States. Over the next couple of years, we're supposed to see a little bit of an uptick in demand. There's a lot of questions now about how to understand consumer preferences and consumer needs coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've seen a lot of research analysts and talking about research they're producing now that are hesitant to push projections out too far right now, because we just don't know the long-term implications of how decisions are going to change and how decisions are going to be made in the future, and how people are going to react to whatever the new or return to old reality is after COVID-19. So, there's a lot of questions around what different industries are going to look like, how people are going to buy, how people are going to act going forward, that is expected to drive demand in the future to a little bit of an increase in demand. But in the US, we've got about 740,000 specific market research professionals. There's millions, however, beyond that aren't in actual market research roles that are needing to do this. Obviously, the first place you think of is sales. Sales and product management are both really high up in terms of the need for market research skills, for tailoring the sales process, to prospecting for clients, to understanding client needs. Got a lot of overlap with sales. And then in terms of product management, looking at product optimization, there's a ton of jobs that have some component of the job demanding market research. Percent of companies that are increasing the number of market research, or their use or their demand for market research, 54%. So we got more than half of companies that are increasing the amount of market research they're consuming. And one of the interesting things, there's a lot of conversation around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that's what our market researchers are talking about too. That's one of the emerging trends and topics here in the space, is the implementation of these emerging technologies to aid the market research process. So we see really fast employment growth in the occupations as well. Fully expect that trend to be replicated globally as well, growing a lot faster than the average for all occupations. And that really goes along with, I think there's a lot of understood demand for data analytics, business analytics skills, and the line between market research and data and business analytics is really blurred. Uh, that analytical piece and understanding the situation, understanding trends, there's just a massive amount of overlap that kind of buoys the demand for specific market research skills and professionals. So we got a really strong industry here, growing really fast or growing really steadily, really strong employment growth, and looking at some emerging technologies that are being implemented too. What are we using market research for? Let's go ahead and fill it all out. Market sizing would be one of the primary factors of it. That's obviously a big component in new products and investment decisions. This is really the very front end of a business, to be honest, or a product line for a business is the very beginning stage. And so you really you want to have an understanding of the market size. You'll hear the phrase TAM a lot, the total addressable market. So we're before we do anything, we really want to understand what's the size, what's the point of doing something if the total addressable market is $1,000. You want to have an understanding of how big something could be before you even start to try and think about how you're going to trying to go after that subject. So that's really the first step here is market sizing, and this is we'll get into what all this means, but this is really going to be predominantly from secondary research, able to look at census data, able to look at other publicly available mass data sets that really enable the main market sizing exercises to be done. And then the next step in the train of thought for the purposes of market research, we get to product development. So once we've sized up a market, made a decision about what we want to do, and we have some idea about how we're going to meet that need there, then we move into product development. And this is usually from primary research. We're really trying to understand what type of product can meet that need for consumers. What are consumers looking for? This is where we really get into the actual building of the business, building of a product or business. It's really a combination of qualitative and quantitative, but it's primarily primary research. And like I mentioned, we'll circle back to all these definitions in a minute, but I just wanted to set that tone there. Then we move on to optimization. Once we've got something out in the market, market research is becoming a little bit more of an operational field. And this is where I mentioned about how other roles are demanding market research skills. So you think about digital marketing professionals and A/B testing. I mean, A/B testing is a function of market research. It's a hypothesis that's being tested, that's being researched to make a decision about a particular product or business. So it's a function of market research that we see growing rapidly. But what this optimization is really about, as it's been more and more of an operational field, is we've got a product in market, something's not going right. Okay, well, what's not going right? And then really getting into the nuts and bolts of figuring out what's wrong. The other one is just sort of operational, like I mentioned, with A/B testing, that sort of thing, where you always want to be making sure that you're applying best practices. It's basically a sort of maintenance. If you ever take time to do just general reading on your industry, on your profession, on what you do, that's basically like maintenance on your skills, and market research about your products is kind of the same thing. It's just staying up to date on how your product fits and how things are evolving. And a lot of this is going to be derived from internal data, but just some other primary research as well is really useful. And the last one is strategic trends. And this is really kind of the a little bit more abstract thinking. It's helping companies identify where they should go in the future, how things are changing, where they need to be looking to pivot their business to over the next 10 to 20 years. This usually is something that requires a little bit more experience and expertise, whereas the previous functions, you might not necessarily have to be an industry professional, or you might not necessarily have to be an industry professional to do all these functions. You would probably need to be somebody that's really well versed in the industry for this last function, because it's a lot more there's a lot more qualitative, a lot more subjective reasoning applied here, whereas the rest is really objective. um, what does a typical project look like? Typical market research project. Typical projects, whenever you're outsourcing them, hiring a market research firm to answer one of these questions, we're going to be looking at about a month and a half, about 6 to 7 weeks. The prices vary widely, but if we're just ballparking averages, we're looking at $10,000 to $20,000 for a project. Obviously, that's going to be split up into a number of components for different people that are fulfilling different aspects of that market research. But a typical timeline that you'll see when you put a project together, you're going to be, first of all, scoping out the project like this. This is a big part of market research is scoping out tasks, and about the first more than a third of it is going to be secondary research. About to touch on what that is. The next phase is going to be the primary research, and the last phase is going to be that analysis and synthesis part that we talked about, that summarization piece that's really crucial. And the analysis and synthesis piece, I do want to touch on something here. This last part, this last 2 to 3 weeks of a project is all about your communication skills, and it's all about communicating as best as possible what you've learned. So over the first few weeks of the project, you're going to be learning, and then in the last couple weeks of the project, you're going to be communicating what you've learned. So secondary research, we've mentioned that term a lot. Now we want to talk about what it is. Secondary research, you might notice we talked about primary and secondary research. So why does secondary research come first? Well, that's typically the first thing that you do. Secondary research, type of research that has already been compiled, gathered, and organized and published by others. Includes reports and studies by government agencies, trade associations, and other businesses in your industries. For small businesses with limited budgets, most research is typically secondary research. So anytime you're going to be starting a new project, the first phase is always going to be secondary research. One, because it's going to help you understand what's already available, so that you know if you need to continue on to the primary research phase. And two, because it answers the basic questions about the topic that you're researching, and then the primary research gets into the higher level of specificity. So there's a few types of secondary research. We've got the traditional desk research, compiling data, aggregating data, just hands on keyboard a lot of time. This is a lot of my job. It's not pretty, but it's one of the best ways to really get a high level of understanding about your space. The second is going to be existing compiled research. This is really valuable here because you're able to leverage what other people have already learned about the industry. It's something that it's able to it enables you to step back and think what has already been learned. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's already solved this question, solved this problem, there's no need in paying for trying to solve it again. So, and then the last one is public data analysis, like we mentioned with the market sizing, census data, other large public data sets. That's going to be the public data analysis piece. Like we mentioned, all of this is typically going to be actually the cheaper component of market research. It's very objective. It's a little bit cheaper, like I mentioned. It's a little bit more rapid. It's always the first phase in the project. Helps you understand the size of the market. Helps you understand what the industry already knows about this market. Helps you understand the traditional desk research. Really helps you understand the companies and the people that you're researching. in a qualitative way as well. So that's what we're looking at with the secondary research. Uh, the primary research part, this is where things get a little bit more expensive sometimes. This is where we are going to get really specific about what we're trying to answer. One of the drawbacks of secondary research is that the available data, what's available, might not be exactly what you need. And that might be a situation to where you can use a proxy for an answer, where you can say, well, if this happens, then we would expect this to also happen. So we can look for that data as well to speak to that. So, but whenever we get to the primary research phase, that whole research, this whole component of research is dedicated to answering the very specific question that you have at hand. And how do we do that? We do that by creating data, by interviewing people, by doing surveys, by focus groups, by secret shopping or competitive analysis, and by behavior analysis and looking at internal data. So primary research is the research that you conduct yourself. It involves going directly to the source to ask the questions and gather information. This is where we're really going to be getting specific, and we're creating data that hasn't existed before. In the interview portion, it's speaking directly with clients or potential clients about what they need. This is going to be the most qualitative thing that we have, that we're doing. Interviews and focus groups are really similar to interviews, just in a group setting. These are going to be the really qualitative ways. Surveys, these are frequently used to enhance statistical modeling, that we're going to be creating data about. We're going to be surveying mass numbers of people to create data about the question that we have at hand. The secret shopping or competitor analysis, understanding what else is available in the marketplace for consumers to choose from. And then the last one is the behavior analysis piece. That's, like we mentioned, the A/B testing. That's like looking at any sort of things going on with your lead funnel, your sales optimization process. That's going to be where most of this is going to lie. So as you can see, this is a little bit trickier to do. You've got to find the people to participate in this. You've got to develop the instruments that you're going to be doing, the instruments that you're going to be using to address these questions. It takes a little bit more expertise to design these, whereas in the secondary research phase, it doesn't require as much expertise. But once we get into the primary phase, if you're not careful with surveys, you can really lead yourself into some really bad conclusions. So this is where we get a little bit more specific knowledge about what's going on. So that's what this second piece of the project is going to look like. So, we get to, at the beginning of the project, we're really concerned with what's out there, what's available, what's the low-hanging fruit, what can we just go out and grab, what can we aggregate that exists. The second phase is what is still lacking, and what do we do beyond that. And so in the end result of putting together a project like that, you then get to that final analysis piece, that summarization piece. And that's where the communication aspect is one of the most misunderstood needs in the market research place. That's one of the things that I've learned in my career, is that if you can't make a decent looking spreadsheet or presentation, the insights, for good or for bad, people perceive quality based on the design of how things are delivered. So, if you deliver something in a really sloppy manner, then it's going to be perceived as not quality market research, and it's just not going to be as valuable to the consumers of it. So that communication aspect is going to be something that's super important there at the end. So that's really what uh, a month or two in the life of a market research professional looks like. You start with the scoping of the project. You go through that initial learning phase about the secondary research, gathering what's available, move on to the more specific question, design your instrument, whether it's a survey, whether it's focus group, behavioral analysis, whatever it may be, and then getting really specific in your communication about what you've learned from those two steps in the process. And then you lather, rinse, and repeat. You do that again for the next project, and you take with you some of what you learned from the previous iteration, and you keep going. And a couple concluding notes about the industry for those of you about the job specifically. U.S. News and World Report ranks market research analysts as the 62nd best job in the U.S. I believe it's also listed as the 9th best business job. Scores really highly in terms of future growth and above average in job market and salary score. It can be stressful, can have issues with work-life balance. It is something that there's always an urgency around it. It's something that's always wanted to be done quicker, and that's why we see AI and machine learning being implemented, ways to try and speed up the process. So there is a bit of a stressful component with it, but they're well compensated. Salaries well above the average salary in the U.S. Job postings are up 33% in June, 33% from last year. 53,000 of these postings in the U.S. In June alone. And then one last interesting note about it, 35% of market researchers didn't plan on getting into this field. They got a job there and then they just stayed there. So I think it speaks to the fact that if you're a curious person, if you just like learning, it's going to be the perfect job for you, because it's really about somebody hiring you to go learn as much as you can about a subject and then come back and teach them. So it's a really fulfilling in terms of addressing your curiosities about things. So if you're a curious person, it's the perfect kind of subject for you. It's something that's obviously growing. We see kind of the fundamentals of how it's done. So yeah, that's really what market research looks like. So and then obviously as a market research professional, you've got to provide your sources. So yeah, thank you. Now we will be taking any questions you might have.
Thanks so much, Brady, for this wonderful talk and for taking us through the different elements of market research and how to do it correctly. And let me see if we can pick up a few questions just before we pick up any questions. Um, I would like to share two programs that we have which cover market research in much more detail, and they have that as a module in the programs, the product management and digital marketing programs that Upgrad offers. So feel free to check it out and be a part of community where you have 85 people from 85 plus countries and learn from peers, because what I take back as a feedback here, Brady, is that there is so much to learn. Like you talked about the secret shopper as well, right? So there's so much to learn from other people in the industry,
Yeah,
and from what other players are doing to identify what strategies are working, what's not, and that comes by closely monitoring them and even speaking to a lot of them. So that forms a part of your primary research as well, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
So yeah, let's move on to a few questions. I'm not sure if this question is really apt for what you just covered, but what's the best techniques for sales for product development? So I I mean it's product development and sales. So if we can have a breakdown of that question, it's asked by somebody anonymous. Do you want to take an attempt?
Best technique for sales and product development. Is that what the
Yeah.
so hmm. I guess I'm trying to understand exactly what they're asking.
Sure, let's move on to the next one. Till then, Henry is asking, where can we do surveys from, which are most effective? Should it be an online link or something which has a QR code form?
Yeah, most of the places that most of the website, there's a ton of survey tools out there, and to be honest, a Survey Monkey is perfectly sufficient for the vast majority of organizations, unless you're getting into some really specific modeling and some really in-depth survey techniques. Survey Monkey is going to do everything that you need to do with being able to share via QR codes. One of the things that is actually the most expensive part of surveying is finding the audience and finding the correct distribution means for that audience. And so that's going to require a little bit of understanding of who your audience is and how they function. So for example, if you're going to be surveying an occupation that doesn't use a computer a lot, well, you're probably going to want to try and find a way to go to employers to distribute that, or some industry group to distribute that, and they might have the best way of distributing it among their members. Whereas if you're going to be surveying programmers, having an online survey is going to be something that's an easy thing. It's just finding the right place to to post it. The other thing that you can do, that I do most of the time, there's a ton of organizations, ton of companies, Survey Monkey's even one of them, where you can purchase survey audiences. You can define the characteristics of the things that you're looking for in the audience, and they'll go out and find them at a certain cost. It varies widely. If you're looking at more general audiences, you're looking at $2 to $5 a response. And then if you get up into really specific pharmaceutical survey audiences, you can get into the thousands of dollars per response. So it varies widely, but there's different audience sourcing groups or audience sourcing companies. And the most common way of finding and distributing your survey to an audience is going through either an industry group that or company's customer base, or some place where the target market frequently congregates, like a website or something like that. And beyond that, just purchasing an audience and distributing it via email, or however the audience company distributes it to them.
Great, thank you for those insights. Um, okay, Ashish is asking, and I think that's the previous question: is sales forecast a part of market research? If yes,
Yes,
you do it.
yeah, it certainly is. I would say it certainly is on the fringe of it. Market research informs sales forecasting. I think in a lot of organizations, sales forecasting is primarily a finance operation, but it is strongly informed by market research. If you're doing sales forecasting without applying what you've learned via market research, then I would argue that your forecasts are not as good as they should have been, because you're not applying what uh, all the available information about the current state of the industry to the forecast. So I would argue that while it's most frequently handled by finance teams, it's something that is and should be informed by market research to a greater extent than it has been historically. But yeah, I would certainly say so, and I say experientially, a lot of times in market research projects that I do, they're used to apply back to sales forecast models. So.
Great. And yeah, agree with you that we should have this as a part of marketing as a function, and less of finance as a function. But one of the things is typically done is sizing, right? In terms of what we always see, where we are trying to size the audience, and that sizing sort of gives you the steps which is like the initial steps for your sales forecast.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. There's an anonymous person saying that the last 2 points in your thank you slide were really interesting. Could you share more inputs? And I think that was about you building a proprietary platform for market intelligence and developing syndicated databases for emerging industries.
That's yeah, specifically for online higher education. That's what 32 Edu does. Happy to share any information about it. You can go to the website 32edu.com and find out anything else about that that you'd like, and reach out to us there for specific uh, for specific questions about that. So yeah, that's a large part of what we do is like I mentioned, the communication piece, starting from so it actually brings up an interesting point, is that as new industries emerge, and digital learning is one of these newer industries, um, that uh, there's not always data to speak to that industry yet. So it has to be created first, and then it's got to be synthesized and analyzed. So that's what we're really involved in doing, is trying to automate that process for digital learning and online higher education. So starting with saying, okay, we'll create the data, we getting that step fulfilled, and then moving on to saying, how do we synthesize this and communicate this to clients in the best way possible? And that's what the tool is that we've built as well. So
Great. Okay, that's from the Q&A. I think the other attendees definitely feel free to ask any questions. Would be happy to answer. Different perspectives from different industries. So that's what all of you together bring here, right? You may not have been actively involved in market research activities as a part of the operational tasks that you do in your day-to-day BAU, which is business as usual, but uh, but you could be a part of an interesting project, right? Just sharing some of this at your workplace with your managers could be a way for you to show that, okay, there's something new I learned, and I'd like to implement it. So feel free to ask any questions you may have. And one of the discussions that I and Brady were having was about, why have we put secondary before primary, right? Just the terms itself look very intuitive, that primary should come first, but then both of us came back to the fact that it's cheaper, like Brady already covered in the session, and two, it's always the first step you look at, right? You start by looking at what the industry is currently, where the industry currently is at, right? And that comes with your secondary reports. And it's very rarely do we go to the market research component. A lot of our answers are found in the secondary research.
and it can change the questions that you're asking in the project too. You can get going in the secondary research phase and realize that there's other things going on that you didn't think of when you were initially scoping the project, and it can change the purpose a little bit of the research. And so it's a really crucial step, because it brings so much learning to the process that informs the rest of the learning that you're going to do. So yeah, it's a really cool kind of situation, to where, like I mentioned, you get paid to go learn about something and then come back and tell people about it, and then you carry on to the next thing. And it's one of the few occupations outside of academia where your function is just to continue learning your whole life. So it's really unique in that regard.
That's true. And I the two different terms that can also be used as synonyms to this are qualitative and quantitative research, right? If you're
Yeah.
using a lot of the research that we do, even in the secondary phase of research, is quantitative, because you're actively looking at forecasts and numbers on what the historical data has been, right? And primary tends to be a lot more qualitative.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the biggest piece of the primary research that's quantitative is the survey aspect, and the behavioral analysis aspect a little bit, uh, using the internal data to answer these questions as well. But yeah, you're exactly right. The secondary research piece is really uh, what is out there, and then the second, the primary research piece is how do people think about what the situation is. So
Great. We have one question from Palak, who's asking what is still the best practice to forecast, quantitative or qualitative? If it's quantitative, which model is the best for pharmaceutical sales forecasts? The example that you give.
I would not be able to speak to pharmaceutical sales forecasting, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I don't have enough expertise there, or any experience there, so I don't want to lead you astray there. But yeah, when you when you're developing a model for sales forecasting, the first thing that you have to evaluate is what your key performance indicators are in your you look at the current state of your business and you understand what your key performance indicators are, and then you find the quantitative data points, the industry data points that best speak to the trend with your key performance indicators. So, if search traffic, if your business is constrained by search traffic, and the amount of search traffic is directly proportional to your sales, then understanding that search traffic piece, that quantitative piece, is going to be one of the most crucial parts of any sort of model that you build for your for your project. So it's really going to be looking at what the key performance indicators are of your revenue and your sales, and then trying to find the more general, not specific to your company, data points about that speak to those particular KPIs.
Thanks for sharing that, Brady. And definitely look at some of the top recognized and reputed sources in terms of quantitative data, right? Where you can just look at the search results, and that should help you get a head start.
Yeah. When you're when you're looking at the quantitative piece, there really is a ton of stuff that's available for free or for very cheap. It's just a matter of there might be one little part missing that you have to address with some sort of primary research. But there's a ton of stuff publicly available that you can use for these models that so often gets overlooked. But yeah, I would say get very acquainted with some of the advanced Google searching techniques, and you'll uncover a lot of information that you didn't know was out there.
If you're in India, there's one consulting firm, I guess ZS Associates. They do quite a lot of work on pharmaceutical industry. You may just look at their blogs as well for freely available data as a starting point. Okay, an anonymous question. When you are starting a service, same as the existing one in a particular market, just let's say e-commerce or
Yep.
even higher education, right?
Yep.
Is it necessary to do market research for it? Absolutely yes. Because and one of the things is we covered this in yesterday's um, conversation with David, where we talked about strategic marketing and operational marketing, right? And strategic and all that we're covering today is forms the strategic marketing bit. We're trying to understand your market, who your audience is, and once you have an understanding of who the audience is, will you get an understanding of what to communicate and how to communicate to them. So yeah,
Yeah.
what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I think in a lot of cases, you don't understand how different your decisions would be if you did market research versus if you didn't. And I can't point to a specific data point about it, but I can just think of so many examples through my career and through working with clients that the discussion around a particular product or initiative prior to the market research, and the decisions, even the questions that were being asked, were vastly different from the questions that were being asked post delivery of market research. And so I would say, it's one of the subjects or it's one of the things that you don't you don't know what you're missing. In a way, you don't know exactly uh, you're just kind of handicapping yourself. I would say it's not even necessarily something that you have to pay for. It's something that I would encourage you to do on your own, even if you're not, in a place to pay for it. But yeah, it's something that it drastically changes the way that you think about and view a particular space if you haven't done the exercise before, and it ultimately alters your decisions because of that. So I would strongly encourage some form of it taking place.
Yeah, and we may have been doing it even without knowing it. Like
Yeah,
when you
exactly.
when you get your relatives and friends to try out your product for the first time, right? And when you take the feedback in, that's your early adopters feedback, which then you use to build on to the next level of your product.
Exactly.
So
And
yeah.
it's just, and it could be as simple as taking that and then writing it all down and putting it together and then trying to apply some sort of analytical strategy to evaluating what do you learn from looking at all of those together. And so it can be something as simple as that you can do yourself. So yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, I'll just while you have some more questions for us, just help us understand how have you been liking this session so far, and a few more details. I am just sharing, yeah, all a feedback form as well. So this is sort of, if you want a glimpse, right? This is something we do for market research, just trying to understand from your feedback how do we get better, right? And this is just such a small step in that regard, but yeah, a
Perfect
healthy
example
step.
of how market research is being operationalized to where you're making sure what you're doing in every instance is optimized and giving people exactly what they need. It's just the perfect illustration of how it's become a bigger and bigger part of the business. Yeah.
Absolutely. Somebody is asking, can we get a recorded session? Absolutely. You shall be emailed the same, and even if you access the same link you joined this session with, you would be able to access the recording an hour later. One anonymous question: there may not be any reference point for new age business models in the digital era. So effective market research may not be feasible or effective.
That is the exact situation when it is of the most importance to do market research is when because in a lot of cases when there's not an existing business model that's out there, when there's an existing business model and an existing industry, there's a ton of market research that you can do on your own and internally if you're just base level trying to do something really cheap and really quick and just doing what you can yourself. But when there's no existing business model with it, that's when it's of the utmost importance because that's when the highest risk is being introduced. And market research is all about de-risking and decreasing the amount of risk in a business venture. It's about making sure that if you think about a business in terms of a bell curve with most risk on one side and least risk on the other, it's about moving as far towards the de-risked side of the bell curve as possible. That's really what the function of market research is. So that's of the most importance when there's no existing industry or business model like that. And you can still, once you understand what your target market is, still go about the market sizing exercises. And then there's not going to be other existing secondary research, but then you can still go about the qualitative piece to try and assess how that market sizes would think about this, and then kind of branch out from there. But yeah, that's the situation when I would say that the most market research is taking place.
Amazing. And yeah, I didn't think about it this way until you put it in this format. Okay, we got it. Thanks for clarifying as well for that question. Okay, do we still have more questions for Brady? He's here for a bit. Feel free to ask. And also help us just with those three buttons on how you liked it and how you'd like to receive communication from us. Okay, seems like we have no new questions. Should I assume that that's it? Meanwhile, let me just go back to one of the questions that we saw yesterday in yesterday's session, where we were talking about the difference between like strategic and operational marketing, and a very interesting concept of selling ice to the Eskimos came up, where I mean, you can't have that as a product, right? So in the first place, doing a market research will also tell you if this product, which you think intuitively works, right, and would be very relevant for you personally, may not work for the larger set at all.
That's that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
So yeah, I just thought of bringing up that point that we covered, and yeah, I had given okay more about this in today's session caveat. So yeah, just thought of bringing that point up. Okay. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Brady, for such so beautifully answering and patiently answering each question that you were asked, and to a great depth and detail. And look forward to having you again for another interesting topic. And look forward to all of you attending more sessions with us, upskilling yourself, and being on this lifelong learning journey with Upgrad. Feel free to reach out to us at admissions@upgrad.com for any question you may have. And do visit our website for any interesting courses that absolutely help you grow and upskill in your career. Thank you and hope to see you soon. Good day.
Thank you.